Welcome to the General Payroll Configuration session. In this session, we will go through the expense, time, and payroll module and get some of the general configuration out of the way. Let's dig into it. What we're going to do in this session is go through some things that are typically one-time setups and, basically get them configured so that we don't have to worry or think about them as we venture into the next steps of the construction payroll configuration. First area we'd like to go into is directly into the expense module. And for these configurations, you want to be at the top level, and then the configurations will trickle down. So let's go right directly into the expense module to start. And we're going to go directly into setup configuration. And inside this configuration is a few areas that you want to keep in mind of, as this is where the defaults are going to happen. We talked about setting up payroll clearing account, for example. And so this is one area that you can link that to the payroll clearing account so it'll get zeroed out. So if you notice over in accounting settings, you'll see an employee liability section here. And a lot of times this will come defaultly set up already. So if you remember from the last series of videos, we should have set up a payroll clearing account. So I believe in the last session, we used 19,000 account series. So whatever you decide on your account number, you could best fit, type it in, or you can just scroll down your general ledger account list. And you'll notice here I have a payroll clearing account, and this is the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to select it. And this will be our employee liability account. So then when the payroll posts over to the expense module for check printing or ACH, it'll use this account to clear out. Typically, we leave the employee advances zeroed out at this point or deleted out. So it's not required to have one in here. So yours might look like that. My demo data had one in there. Another important button to make sure is turned on. It should come out of your instance automatically checked off, but you do want to check it off to make sure it is working, is this expense type here. We need this checked because we're going to use this in our next setup area. We need what's called expense types checked off. Now, one note to consider here is if you are going to be using the expense module for other things, like, for example, to actually reimburse employees' actual expenses, you don't want to have your payroll clearing account linked here. What you want to have linked here will actually be the payable account that you're going to use for your expenses. Sometimes it's employees' expense payable. Sometimes it's just accounts payable. But if you are planning on using the expense module for other things other than payroll, you'd want to put that liability account there, not the payroll clearing account. I will show you in the next step where you can have it default for the payroll clearing account for the payroll expense type. So again, if it's easier, if you're just planning on using the expense module strictly for payroll, you can go ahead and fill out your payroll clearing account here. If not, you can leave it blank or leave it with accounts payable for now, or whatever you configured in your prior sessions, and then we will have a place to default the payroll one next. Now, as you go through this, you'll want to follow your normal configuration that you should have gotten in the time and expense module, but these should already be set up for you. I'm going to scroll down here, and I just want you to note the payments area here. Depends on if you have your bank account set up already for payroll or not. But if you do, you can come into this payment section and you could fill out the default bank account. So a lot of people forget to do this. And if they have a checking account for payroll and accounts payable, this will help speed the process up when you go to reimburse employees for payroll. This is where it can automatically populate the bank account. You'll still have the ability to change it during the workflow process. But, if you want to pre-fill it, this is where you can do that inside the expense configuration. And that's really it as far as it pertains to payroll and configure expenses. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. And we're going to go into our next area now. The next thing in the expense account that we want to make sure is the expense module, that is set up and configured for payroll, is expense type. So now that we checked off that button for expense types, we are going to need a payroll expense type. So this is one of the things that once we set it up, you'll probably never have to use it again. So at top level again, under expenses, I'm going to be in setup. And you'll see down here in expense, we have types. So you're going to go ahead and click on the types. And you're going to come into here and we're going to fill out a new one. You may see some others in here out of the box. Again, my demo data has one. We're not going to use whatever one is here. What you should always do by best practice, and we'll see this when we get into the payroll configuration directly in that module, is we're going to set up an expense type called payroll. We're going to keep it very simple, and we're going to keep it consistent across all companies who set up construction payroll. We usually use the payroll expense type. So we're going to go ahead and click add here. And what you'll be able to do is under expense type, I'm just going to fill it in exactly how it's typed, payroll. And, you don't have to get too creative here. And you'll notice this is the other area in the system that you can use the clearing account for it. So if you want to come into here and you want to go payroll clearing account, you can come into here and you can fill that out as well. Now, if you are using the expense module for other things, like I mentioned, the liability account, the employee liability account, this is where you could fill it out in this offset account. So instead of using the one that's over in the configuration settings that we just did, you can come into here and also list the payroll clearing account as well. Okay. But because we already have it set up in the configuration and we're not using expenses for anything else in this demo environment except for payroll, we're going to go ahead and leave that blank. You really don't need anything else besides making sure that it's active for this scenario. So really, we just need an expense type called payroll, and we need the payroll clearing account. And then if you're going to use expense for reimbursements, then make sure you also fill out the payroll clearing account here under offset account number as well. And we'll click save. And our expense type for payroll is set up, and we'll never have to change it again. We'll check it off the list and we're good to go. Before we start diving into the direct payroll configuration for that module, is we also want to go into one more module called the time module. And we're going to do the same thing at top level. And we're going to go to setup, configuration. And we just want to make sure a few things are checked off and set up correctly. So we're going to go into setup configuration. And once we get into here, we're going to scroll down and take a look. And definitely want to check back on these videos from time to time. There is some enhancements coming out at the time of this video. They're not out yet, but there is some enhancements coming out for the timesheet modules between the time module and payroll that might change some of these settings. So as enhancements and changes happen, we will update the video. So just keep coming back and taking a look. If your screen looks different at the time of the video, there might be a new video that you need to use. But here's your timesheet settings. Basically, we're going to, leave these by default pretty much. The couple of things that we want to make sure are checked off is number one, down here, we want to make sure these are turned off as far as allow entries between start and end dates. This kind of can error out and just make it more difficult to enter time. So we want to leave these off. What's important and what is definitely needed is enable duplicates. We need those turned on for both line timesheets and lines in a timesheet. In case there's similar coding per line, this allows the system to accept the time entries, and we want that as far as payroll goes. So you just want to make sure under enable duplicates that both these my timesheets and lines in a timesheet are checked off. The other area in the system, especially if you're not really going to be entering payroll by day, some people do enter just by the week. And when you're entering that time, it makes you pick a day. So one of the things you want to make sure of is that you have some required per work weekday and required per weekend day. You want to up these maximums. So, if you want to enter, all your time under one line for 40 hours, you want to make sure this maximum is at least 40. I usually tell people just turn these to 99. Then you don't have to worry about it, and it's safer that way. So if you do want to enter 40 hours on one line for the week, you can, and the system won't reject you. Now, you could use this to prevent you from entering, more than so many hours per day in payroll, so you can also use that for that. But the most typical is to just put these on 99, get them out of the way. The rest of this will come back in. Again, this is more, a lot of these configurations here are more there in case you don't have the construction payroll module and there is an ability to enter time directly into this time area. As far as payroll is concerned, our timesheets are going to sync. So the timesheets over in payroll are always going to sync into staff timesheets here. So all that configuration is really the majority of it's coming from the payroll module, not here, except for these few little areas that we're going through today. So you don't really have to worry about these right now. It's more if you want to see the time entry in the time module, how do you want to see it? I would not recommend putting approvals on. You're going to handle that ahead of time in your time capture system over in payroll. By the time it gets over to the time module, we're not going to have to worry about approvals. GL posting, we're only going to have to worry about it from one perspective. Because we're using construction payroll again, the general ledger entry is actually going to happen over there. The only thing that really happens here in the time module is the hours. So you'll see here the journals, and this comes default. So usually we just say leave it to the PLH, which is the default project labor hours statistical journal. So all payroll hours are going to post over to the general ledger as well in a statistical journal. And this is where they're coming from. And this is the statistical accounts that they use. And usually we never change these. They already come with your system. So you should just leave that alone. And again, because we're doing payroll through construction payroll, we don't really need anything related to general ledger set up in here because we're going to handle it with the expense type and we're going to handle it over in the payroll module. So from that, that's really all we need is, the biggest thing is make sure the duplicates are checked off there and you have your hours set up correctly. So we'll go ahead and save that. So at that point, we've officially moved to the point where we can actually get into the payroll module and start configuring that. So let's go do that next. So I'm still going to be at top level. When you get into payroll and you get directly into the payroll module, as far as where you are, top level, entity level, doesn't really matter too much until you get into the employees and job setup. And then when that happens in later videos, you'll see you'll definitely want to be at entity level. But for this configuration, top and entity, it's all of this configuration here is one standard list in payroll. Okay, so you also want to consider that if you have multiple entities that you're doing payroll for, you might need to, when you start setting up pay modifiers and things like that, you'll see in the later videos, you may want to separate them by company. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and get into some configuration that, again, we can set it up once and we should be done with it going forward. So if we go over to payroll setup, first area we're going to want to get into is what's called tenant configuration. And this is where it's going to tell the system how to send it to the expense module and how to send it to the general ledger. So what you're going to have is first of all, you can have a journal entry description. So when it posts over to the general ledger, what do you want it to say? Call it whatever you want, payroll process, payroll, weekly payroll, whatever you want it to call. The out of the box here is calling it payroll process. That's fine. What's critical is for your payroll journal identifier, it should pre-fill as well, but make sure it is PYRJ, the payroll journal, all caps. And if I go take a look quickly over in General Ledger, you'll see under Setup, under Journals, what that's telling you is the initial payroll entry for job costing and your payroll GL account. It's going to go to this payroll journal, PYRJ, and that's how it tells the system. When you hit Post Payroll, that's how it tells the system where to put the journal entry. Okay, so you want to make sure that is under tenant configuration. That is set to PYRJ. It comes default that way. And you'll notice here in my demo environment, they set it up to that other expense report. Well, you can call this whatever you want. It looks like this demo environment is doing an ACH payment. I just like to call this payroll checks. You can call it whatever you want. It also depends on if you have direct deposits or checks. But they're posting it to the PRACH. We want to set it up best practice. We're just going to type in payroll because if you remember, this is where it's going to link to that expense type over in the expense module that we just set up. So again, I called it payroll. So I want to make sure it's linked over to the payroll module. Okay, to the payroll expense type. You do have the option when it posts that information to send it over as drafts for the journal entry, for the time cards, and the expense report. Best practice is leave it as no. By the time you're getting to that point, you don't really want to have to go and post another level. Basically, when you hit post in Payroll, you're typically pretty sure it's good to go. So just say no. There may be some extreme cases that you need it on draft, and we can discuss that in Q&As, or you can bring it up during your deployment sessions. So we'll go ahead and leave that on no, and we'll hit save. And at that point, we shouldn't really have to come back into here at all. So we'll get that out of the way. Next thing we'll venture into is pay groups. Under Setup, Pay Groups. Now for pay groups, typically they do give you some default pay groups. For example, you'll see one here called Office and Field. Now you technically do not need multiple pay groups for Office and Field. Actually, best practices, we would recommend not separating them if you don't need to. And the reason being is when you process payroll, you have to process by pay group. So if you have a lot of pay groups, you're going to have to click a button 3 or 4 times to generate the checks, especially if you get paid on the same day. The period end dates are the same. So if you have pay groups across and everyone gets paid weekly and they get paid on a Thursday and it's the same week ending dates for the calendars, you do not need separate pay groups. You technically, even if you have multiple entities, still don't need separate pay groups if everybody's getting paid the same weekly. Now, I would recommend, if there is a potential to change your check frequencies and your week ending dates and things like that, maybe from company 1 to company 2, it may be beneficial to make a weekly pay group for, for example, Timberline GC, and a weekly pay group for Timberline Development if I have payroll in both these entities. But typically, here's what we would recommend. Let's assume you're on a weekly payroll, or you have office employees that are biweekly and field are weekly. Well, then you can have a pay group called weekly and a pay group called biweekly. Keep it simple. Okay. So we'll click create a new one here. And let's just say we have a weekly payroll and everybody gets paid weekly. Okay. And we can add the year. Let's add a payroll year for 2025. And the biggest thing here is you need to set your first week of the year. So keep in mind, if you're setting it back, 2024, your week ending might be on the 29th of December of 2024, but the check date is on Thursdays. So your first check date for 2025 is actually January 2nd. Okay, so you do need to set that first week right. Once you get that correct, it should pre-fill all the weeks in for you. So if I hit add year, or, again, if you're bi-weekly, it'll set the weeks. But you'll see here I have a 2025 now, and I can see there's all my payroll period end dates. Okay. Now you can come into here and hey, in November, Thanksgiving, for example, is on the 27th. We can come into here and say, let's make the pay period end date for that week on a Wednesday. You don't need to, though. You'll always have the ability to change the check date during your processing payroll that week. These are just defaults. When I click save, I now have a weekly pay group. And you can go ahead and fill a year out in advance. There's nothing really stopping you from doing that. So I can come in here and say add year. You will need a year set up before you can do that week's payroll. So, you want to make sure you get a couple in. That's fine. And it will pre-fill automatically based on your first year. So it's very easy to do. You'll hit add. And now you'll notice I have my 2026 dates. Save. And that's it. That's all there's to it for the weekly pay groups. You might have another group maybe for biweekly. You can set that up as well. But basically, and then, hey, once we're only going to use weekly, you can come into here and these ones that come out of the box, you can just delete them right out. And you could delete these and redo them as much as you need ahead of time. We'll just hit delete and we'll delete those out. So now we have a clean, everybody's weekly in our test environment here. So we're just going to set up one pay group. Last area we'll take a look at in this video is called entity. And it's not the, your entities that you've already set up in the company area of Intacct, but it is related to them. So you can see here I have multiple entities already set up, but let's say I only have payroll in one entity, the Timberline GC, or a couple of different entities here. So what we need to make sure of is in payroll that the payroll module can link to those entities. And this is where we tie things out like federal tax ID, how do we log into Atrix for tax reporting, things like that. So what we need to do is we need to make sure under setup entity in payroll that you have the entity set up. So when we get to the employee part, we have to link each employee to a payroll entity. And you'll notice here when I go into it, I don't have any linked. So there's some setup that we have to do. You could do this now. You could do this at a later time, but I just want to bring it up now in this video. So it's very easy to set it up. You'll just click Create New. And it's not really creating a new, it's just linking to it. So you'll see here, here's your list of your entities that are already in the system. And we're going to set up one here for Timberline GC. And, you want to make sure your effective date, I would be safe and start it at the beginning of the year, just in case you get into testing later on. It's easier to test if your effective dates are behind. And you're going to say, is this a legal entity? And in most cases, it's going to be yes. This basically says, hey, do you need to do separate W-2 and tax reporting for this entity? And if the answer is yes, it needs to be set up as a legal entity. You can fill in your federal tax ID, and there's kind of employers, and there's kind of payers, regular. Fill that out. And there's some things you want to make sure you set up. What's your timesheet start date? What's your timesheet duration? Typically, we're 7 days. And when we get into it closer to go live, we're going to come back into here and fill out things like your Atrix customer identity. That's for tax filing, and you may not have one yet, and you don't need to fill that out right now. You can come back later. We're going to get into this in the later videos at the end, but basically this is one area when we get into the general ledger that it can retrieve general ledger accounts from. And over here, this chargeable tax classification will help us determine how it retrieves a workers' comp code, in what order. Does it start by the job? Does it start by the employee? We could turn these on and off. Typically, as far as best practices go, usually this chargeable tax classification override is set to yes. So you can go ahead and do that. And at this time, and you can read a little caption here as to why you might want to do that. I'm going to hit save. And now we have an entity set up. So, if we're getting to the stage where we need to start setting up our employees in payroll, you're not going to be able to do that unless you have that entity set up. So what you want to make sure of always is that you have your entity description here listed. Now, there is one other scenario. You can look it up in the Ask Richards videos for more information. But if you need to do a secured executive payroll or things like that, basically what you would need to do is set up an entity for your secured payroll here. And then you would set up an entity for it. And you can say, is legal entity. You'll basically say no. And when you do that, it'll allow you to link to another entity so that you can always combine them together for tax reporting and W-2 reporting. But security-wise, you want it as a separate entity, because that's how we can establish the security for it in Intacct. And again, if that is needed, reach out to us, check out some videos, discuss some Q&A, and we'll make sure you're configured correctly for a secured entity. Executive payroll, I should say. And that's it. And we'll come back into here to finalize this before we start testing and going live. And we'll go from there. Okay. So that's it. That's the last thing I wanted to talk about in this configuration session. And we'll go ahead and get those filled out. If you have any questions on it, join Q&A, and we'll see you in the next section. Thank you.